Mate, what's the number one thing most people get wrong when it comes to running?
Oh, is it just the one? I think there's a few things. I reckon trying to force outcomes. I reckon if I'm going to pick one, it'd be forcing outcomes. Those outcomes can be anything, whether it be foot strike, cadence, knee drive. That'd be the number one.
Number one. What are the 2, 3, 4, 5? Man, I preface this by saying I really appreciate your approach to running. I feel like it's different than the status quo. We've met a few times, and like I've told you this before, but I credit you for shifting a really strong belief I held around running, which was most things that are a run technical issue can be solved with capacity, which I now don't really hold that belief to be true anymore. So once upon a time, strength fixes everything. Now there's a technical component to something it is a skill. Most people maybe never have been taught the skill well. So the line of work that Brad and I are in, where we see a lot of people who are injured, I feel like is a perfect time to recalibrate a skill when you're not able to do something much. So the exposure or the frequency or the amplitude or intensity is lower, so you can probably elicit some change. So that's kind of why we wanted to, get you in today, because your approach is different. So why is it different? What made you come to this point and approach run skill training differently from most people?
I think even having the 3 separate focal points of the three of us to highlight, like, there is 3 really important pieces to that puzzle. And whilst they, work hand in glove, they do sit separate, and they're just as important as each other. They can influence each other, but they can't actually fix each other. Like, if someone's injured, I can't just say, look, I'll fix their technique, and all of a sudden that their rehab's done. And vice versa, just because they're really good running technique doesn't mean that they're stronger. So they're really independent pieces to the puzzle. I think historically, running technique has been weighted until someone is injured before we can start to change it. And I think there's the reason being, I think the focal points on it, when we talk about like outcomes, it's probably easy to focus on those outcomes when you're starting from scratch. But there has to be a way to be able to actually change those movement patterns and a running technique in a manner that can create change, small pieces of change over time, that you can do it before that person's even got injured. So I kind of see everyone on that same scale between like injury and performance. And depending on where they start on that scale, you can actually start to slide them and shift them towards performance. Like, they could be here and they're coming back from surgery and zero running. And anything you can do for them to improve their movement patterns in an efficient manner is going to take them also towards like a performance benefit. It's going to take them away from this. But if you start them a little bit higher up on the scale, it's taking them further away from injury, but also closer to performance there as well. So they're all sitting on that same scale. And the manner in which I try and do it is flip. So instead of focusing on those outcomes, it's what are those inputs, so that we can actually create change over the entire system, from head to toe. But it's a small piece for each part from head to toe. So it doesn't require any decrease in training or decrease in intensity, because it is so spread. And because it's so spread, then we can actually change it before it breaks. So that's sort of where I see the difference in traditional technique coaching.
Paul, at the start there, you said, Hugh asked the number one mistake runners make, and you said you can't force outcomes.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
My approach is very much top-down, so you start sort of top-down and understanding how everything influences everything else, and that each part of the body has a role within running. More often than not, people think about feet and legs, or what is happening down at the bottom of the chain, and forcing those outcomes, whether it be a foot strike, a landing, a reference point of landing in regards to center of mass, a cadence, a pace, a recovery height. Like, they're all outcomes of movement patterns, and how those movement patterns and ranges of motion actually work together. And so when I talk about outcomes, like, that's an outcome kind of focus. Knee drive is another one. But if you're delaying toe off, so if you're taking too long to leave the ground and you're using a lower leg movement that's actually kind of pulling a mechanic, like it's a pulling mechanic backwards, your foot is so far behind the body that to try and to get from that point and then to create a knee lift, there's no time and space to occur. So you can't do that until you actually change how long you're on the ground for. So decreasing that ground contact time, changing what's actually initiating that movement off the ground. So then the second part or the second phase of that recovery phase is the knee drive happens, but that's kind of the last part that happens, not what's happening to initiate it. So all those outcomes have, I think, traditionally been the focal point of running technique change, and it just doesn't work, I don't think, or it's not effective, and it's really difficult for an athlete to make those changes because there's so much happening rather than focusing on what the input is.
So if you can't force them, how do you influence them?
Forcing is more about like forcing those outcomes, so trying to actually fit someone in a box of, cadence is a big one. Yeah. Stick to a cadence or increase your cadence. And that's essentially like, okay, just do a smaller version of the same movement pattern. So it's kind of a little bit square peg round hole, and that's what I mean by forcing. When I think about changes, it's like from top down, everything above influences everything below. And if, just say, as Hugh knows, the start point for the majority of people that I work with is an arm swing, but for completely different reasons for all different athletes. But the arm swing has a real important role within that movement pattern. What it doesn't do is create force into the ground. You don't touch the ground. Okay, so what you start to think about is, what do they do? You need a symmetrical movement so you can create timing, so you can create balance. The most important role that they play is to assist with creating lift. Like, we're getting off the ground every single step. And if you've got a movement that's on the transverse plane or a horizontal plane, even put it up today in my story, like if you're making flat movements, that's not assisting with getting off the ground. So by changing even just from the top, it actually allows the legs to go, oh, shoot, I've got some space. I can get off the ground a little bit earlier. I might get a little bit of knee lift off this. So you're creating these little changes all the way down through the system to allow you to attack the next piece. So get to the torso. Is it thoracic extension? Is there rotation? What's happening? So you're kind of like peeling back these layers so that you can inevitably, and in most cases, get down to there, but you can't if everything above is actually telling a different story or giving a very different message. So that's sort of the way that I do approach it.
I believe you term it the top-down approach,
yeah,
quite literally.
Yeah.
I want to take like a really common case that we would see and something that since seeing you operate in the way that you kind of cue athletes, Ellie Salthouse, who's racing right now as we speak, 70.3 worlds.
We'll see her run in a sec though. We'll be finished by the time the run starts.
we can pick it to pieces
sure,
after a hard 90 k's on the hills.
Just want to see a race.
Yeah, absolutely. So from seeing you operate there, I was selfishly as a coach, kind of see what you do, and the case that I feel like we always see, like that tightrope run, someone crossing their midline with their legs, and something I've seen you treat really effectively by not talking about the legs or hips. Like, what is the approach when you see that happening with a runner? What are you looking for, and then how are you cueing to try and elicit change?
Each individual athlete's different. Like that outcome of movement of that crossing can happen in a myriad of different ways. So it's kind of then understanding what is that person to shift mass left and right, because essentially what's happening is they're not still and stable in the areas that they should be, which is the torso, or they are making movements that are not allowing it to be. So it depends on what's actually driving it or what's following it. So what's a driving movement, what's a following movement? And that driving movement can come from a rib cage either rolling or twisting or rotating or however you want to put it. Or it could be the arms that are moving in that transverse plane as well that is actually making then the torso follow. So it's kind of understanding what is that person doing, what is the driving point, what is the focal point of their movement, and then starting to break it down from there. Because if we can take away those lateral movements, whether it's rotation or whether it's even like actually rocking side to side as what they think is a part of their counter movement, which should be an arm swing. If that's a part of their counter movement, then their feet are just going to have to balance. They can't stay a little bit. We don't want to stay under our hips because it just doesn't work that way. Like, it's going to be closer to a midline. It's not going to be crossing. There's too far, there's too little. It's like the Goldilocks, too hot, too cold. Like, we're trying to get it just right. And I think too many people think it's got to be tram tracks. It doesn't work that way. Physics doesn't work that way.
And within the individual, right, as well, like, everyone's going to probably have variance within that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So the way I see, I guess it's probably getting a little off track, but the way I see like the three core silos is physics, the biomechanics, which is the applied physics, which is the running biomechanics, and then the individual. And the top and the bottom, actually the two most important ones that influence the middle one of the biomechanics. You can't have like a perfect biomechanic or an ideal biomechanic if that person can't even get to the range. If they've got an injury history, what is their capacity? So that person is just as important as the physics. The physics you can't change. The person is so individual, and you got to work within that person. You can't, square peg and force it just because you think, okay, that's the best biomechanics, and you got to do that. You got to understand what their history is, and you got to make sure that you can actually align those two. But the number 1 and number 3 solo and me, for me, are the 2 most important. Can't outrun physics. So anyone who says that, oh no, your mechanics are your mechanics, and that's your body's best version of it. No, physics doesn't work that way. You can be better, and you might have to be perfect, but you can't outrun those physics.
So for those people that say mechanics don't matter, and
fuck, sorry, didn't mean to swear. I got so far. I was over 10 minutes. No, but that's like saying mechanics don't matter on a rowing stroke or a swim stroke. Like, they do, because the mechanics are applied physics. You can't get away from that. The nature of running, I think, the narrative around being acceptable to say that is because people haven't been able to do it well in the first place. So if you do it and you try it and you do it poorly and you have really bad results, that's you poor coaching. That's not mechanics doesn't matter. Very different. So I think we're now starting to get to a point to understand that no, running mechanics do matter. What matters is the coaching of it. And historically, it probably hasn't been done super well because it's been kind of more of that outcome focused. We need to think about what's input focused. So we can actually improve, not just change, improve mechanics, and not just have to wait until that person's broken before we have to do it.
It's such a polarized, I think in my 19 years of physio life, it's, I've recognized that if you're extreme on one end or on the other, you're possibly at risk of missing the mark. It's not that binary. There's so many factors, and I was really reminded, which sounds funny to say that, but a year and a half ago I was doing Edna King's 2-day hip and groin course. Edna, probably PhD hip and groin injuries, lead therapist at Aspetar, and he was conducting that on the Gold Coast. And Edna is very big on that philosophy of running as a skill, and he'll be consulting some of the highest paid athletes on the planet for hip and groin pain from the football leagues, etc. in Aspetar. And and I'd almost forgotten that just in clinical practice where you get so focused on things. And I'm like, it is a skill. And I think we posted something on the channel, the Physical Performance Show channel, about the skill nature of it. And we shared a clip, that's right, the interview for yourself, Hugh. And then it just lit up Paul with, well, science paper here, science paper there. And it was quite a controversial little run that it got.
Yeah,
but
technique doesn't indicate injury, and technique doesn't matter. And
which is remarkable, because if running is the only movement pattern that apparently it doesn't matter and it doesn't indicate, how you move determines how you load. So if you don't think you are loading a specific area and getting injury in that area, you're kidding yourself, and you can't understand movement. Like, the research I agree with, because it's so hard to research running as well, because it's such a complex movement pattern. It's like, what do you focus on?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of times where you can actually rule stuff out, which I agree with, like don't change foot strike pattern as a focal point. No, don't, because you're not going to change anything else. You're just adding a different lever or taking one away, depending on what you're doing in a change sense. And the research, unfortunately, is normally kind of 7 to 10 years behind good coaching and bad coaching. So it could be wrong end of the scale when you're trying to change something, or it could be the right end of the scale, but it's still 7 to 10 years behind to prove the person is either correct or incorrect.
Yeah.
So
I think it's funny you mentioned swimming before, and if you work with swimmers, and there's a great paper that one of the former guests of the show, Alec McKenzie, published as part of his PhD looking at swimming mechanics, and there were 3 predictive risk factors for a swimmer's shoulder. 1, changes in training workload, so start-stop. 2, posterior shoulder endurance. And 3 was biomechanics, how they swim. And this was a pretty robust piece of literature that Alec McKenzie and Stephen Duhigg and the crew at QAS/Griffith Uni put out. And so you think about that, that's a skilled task. Everyone recognises that swimming's a skilled task. Running's a hugely skilled task. But it doesn't have that same appreciation, the role of coaching and cueing. So I just find it really interesting. And at times quite stunning that there's always these armchair warriors that want to pull out the papers but look, this systematic review hasn't. And it's like, yeah, but you can't say. Rich Willey talks about his 3 concepts of running biomechanics, and one is that mechanics will determine where training workload errors show up, and I think that's
true,
profound.
Yeah, and like this
from one of the most researched guys in the running gait space.
Yeah. And again, going back to the how you move determines how you load, which is exactly that. The difficulty as well with running is that you can move perfectly and you can still get injured if you overdo the loading. Like if you return to running, if you increase mileage or intensity or all the above, then all of a sudden, like more likely you're going to be loading in the areas, you're going to get injured in the areas that are going to absorb or hopefully absorb or produce, both sides of it, absorb or produce the load. But you can still get injured. And sometimes I use the example of cycling and swimming, that they're so biomechanically and technically efficient these days that the physiological capacity between all the athletes are pretty similar. Like there's not a big variance in degree in like VO2s or capacity or output. Technique is kind of one of the big parts, or the turns and the starts in swimming, or the technology in the bikes. Whereas in running, there's still got such a variance in capacity of individuals that can still be super competitive at an elite level because of this variance in biomechanics. So we've got I use the breaking 2 as an example. When you've got these 3 athletes, the one that did very, very well and has become the greatest marathon ever had the smallest physiological capacity out of all those 3. Just so happened he had the best mechanics though. So he's making the most out of the engine he's got. The other 2 weren't. They need a huge engine to be somewhat competitive because they're running on flat tires. So I think running is almost like the last of the endurance in sports in particular, that there's still so many different variables still allowed, or still allow some to be competitive because biomechanics hasn't caught up to it like it has the other sports.
And I don't think anyone that knew that about breaking 2, that, because I remember the articles, as you cite there, Paul, about VO2 with those 3 respective runners, and as you say,
he wasn't even picked to start with.
Yeah,
he wasn't picked. There were 6 people picked before him.
Yeah, wow.
Because he didn't have the VO2 max capacity, the 6 that they chose. It was just the other couple were injured. Poor mechanics. No. Yeah. That's right. But he was the lowest. So he's the last one picked because one of the guys said, well, do you think we shouldn't just pick the guy that's got the fastest time so far? Just, give him a go?
Yep.
Yeah.
And yet the science doesn't show, in some papers, a clear link between mechanics and efficiency. But we'd all conceptually look at a runner and go, they're moving well because it's pretty on the eye.
Yeah.
There has to be some build efficiency into that.
It depends on what they're regarding as the efficiency though as well, because it sometimes gets confused or mixed with economy and oxygen usage. So the economy of an athlete to be able to do a poor mechanic, they're just trained or have capacity to be able to do that poor mechanic really well, rather than some simplicity of like ground contact time, flight time, steps. Something as simple as like how many steps are you taking to get to A to B, how much is it costing you? And there's the efficiency rates. Like how much is each step costing you, cost per step? So force or energy lost per step has to be replaced to maintain momentum. So if you're going to be on the ground for longer and have a high ground reaction force, economy might be really high, but efficiency is kind of low. So how are they actually recording that, or how are they testing it? Because you can improve efficiency in say, one of my sessions, you can improve efficiency, but economy might drop a little bit because it's starting to use the system slightly differently. But the ability to catch up is going to be really quick, and the ability to take over is going to be even quicker because it's costing you less. It doesn't happen as often as what I thought would, to be honest, but it does happen because it is such a change, particularly when we're making more holistic changes. If we're doing it from a start point of injury, we can go, okay, stuff it, let's just change everything because we can, rather than the small piece-by-piece approach. But that can happen as well, for sure.
If you take that example, because I love it how you've summarising there the difference between economy and efficiency, and how something that is very capacity driven and not so much skill driven, if you've got the ability to just tolerate, not say junk load or junk skill biomechanics, you can get away with a few sins. And we all know those athletes who just never get injured, and then there's some who are very likely to get injured. So within even that scope, because it's such a complex issue, right? There's so many different variables to say, we know that readiness, HRV, central nervous system, muscular capacity, tendon tolerance, all these things are important. When you've had a fight with someone, what's your stress load, all these things. And so to say that biomechanics doesn't matter is, I still don't understand why people try to make that argument. It's almost just like to be controversial or to make an argument in that zone. But mate, when you were saying in injury rehab, it's a perfect time to make changes because they don't have the big volumes. Then take someone like that, maybe like a bone stress or coming back from a tendinopathy. What is the process you would go through with someone like that where you've got time? They're not doing any running currently. Like, could you run us through what that process looks like?
Trying to make a more holistic change. So the top down is very detail oriented. So it's like piece by piece and making sure everything's really clear and well understood by the athlete, and so that they can implement it. If I can go the other way, which is like a more holistic change, it's like changing the complete pattern. So we're thinking about how humerus and femur work together, what direction of movement, what direction of force are we creating, how are we synchronizing them up. So we're kind of taking away the detail side and changing a whole pattern of movement itself that you can actually then, yes, it will change landing, it will change how and what you do to absorb and return energy. Then we'd add the detail back on top. So I'd go to like change pattern completely on start from zero, as opposed to add detail from top down, which will naturally change pattern over the course of a long period of time. So they're kind of like the two ends of cueing changes, determined by the individual when they turn up.
Sure. And I've seen your cueing and I found it quite interesting, and I told when I was chatting to Brad about this as well, it was almost like letting someone figure out the solution to a problem versus giving them the answer. Correct me if I'm wrong, you have a teaching background, is that... So how does that influence your coaching? Because I found that quite profound, and it's something, in the skill acquisition world, Nick Winkelman, some of those guys from the US who influenced what I did early, there were things I were aware of, and then seeing you implement that was really cool. So how'd you get to that point of cueing? And
we only talked about the start. Like I played elite hockey growing up. Well, once I'd grown up, and I always took a real interest in the running side of things, but the skill development side of things, and it didn't make sense to me just sort of be told what to do and then just to replicate it, because it's really difficult. And I think over the course of time and some input from other coaches that I had as well, to start to understand that until you understand what you're currently doing, you don't understand what that feels like, so that then you can't actually have a contrast model. So the whole start of the process that you've seen is like just giving a person an understanding of what it feels like to do what they are doing. And often almost every time it tells a story as to why they're probably loading the areas that they've either got injured or are injured with. Once they get that current understanding, then we can make a change and create a contrast piece. So that, new way, old way, being able to understand what it feels like to focus on a specific cue and how that influences the whole pattern, and then immediately go back to old way to give them that internal awareness, the proprioceptive awareness of like, oh shit, now I can feel what I'm doing, rather than just being told. Because we're not there day to day for the most part, for the most athletes. So they need to know what it feels like to not be doing it, just as importantly as what it feels like to be doing it, so that they can actually reaffirm that change, so that they can create habit over time and repetition. Otherwise it won't happen. If it's just being told what to do, you'll go home and you might do it for the first little bit, you might not. And you turn back up in a week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on how often you see the coach, and you do the skill or you run. The coach is like, what are you doing? You're doing the same thing, you've reverted, because they don't know what it feels like to revert. So you have to teach those two. Otherwise it won't become habit, and it won't become intrinsically aware. And it won't become intrinsically aware of the patterns of movement they were making to create impact injury or stress injury previously.
It's so funny, like my head jumped to two things you were saying there, like the self-awareness piece. Nowadays it's like run into the watch, headphones in, like you're almost like unaware, blissfully unaware of technique, to the point of you're like so driven by data and what's going on. So, and I feel like people get around like that in life as well. Very
data outcomes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
What's your cadence? What's your heart rate? What's the speed? So that was very eye-opening. I think there's a lot to be gleaned from that. People, float around in their day-to-day without a lot of self-awareness as well, unfortunately. So I think having a practice of, I often get people to focus on the breath or, shoes off, so you can actually get more sensory input information to, have a nervous system that's actually receptive to change as well. But being aware of what you're doing, like you said, it's like, those exams that you rocked up to back in the day, and like maybe someone told you the answer on a multi-choice and you're like, yeah, sweet. A week goes by, you don't remember anything from that subject. And versus the ones where you loved it, you got involved, you understood the process, you understood the principles behind what you were learning. I still remember those subjects now to this day. And so it makes sense the same would occur with movement. If you can be aware and figure it out for yourself instead of someone going, hey, Paul, it's B on question 2 and C on question 3.
It's like the best storytellers are most remembered because, and even they talk about in sport now and having a story and having a theme for the week because it connects what you're trying to do on that weekend or what you're trying to do on that day. This is telling the story of why you're getting what you're getting and why it feels in the manner it feels like, or it sounds like it, or it looks. You say when someone moves really, really well, it's not an aesthetic that we're trying to match. It's because they spend very little time on the ground. There's very little impact. They spend a lot of time in the air. The big parts of the body are moving, and it looks fluid. But that also has a feel to it and has a timing and a rhythm to it. So until you can actually feel what it feels like to not have that, and there's the story, and that story is now you can actually feel a change. You're like, oh shit. So it's not about me telling the person that's better. They end up telling me what it feels like. And that's kind of the process, which is awesome to hear as well, because you're not make a really conscious effort and a conscious point not to lead, particularly through the sessions as well. It's just feel this part of the body when you're running out new way and feel that part of the body when you're coming back old way and tell me what you feel. Not feel that you're doing this on this way and doing this on that way. It's tell me what you notice. Because then that connects the story and that's a learning process for that individual rather than just being told.
So internal versus external cueing in simple terms, or is it more than that?
It's a little bit more than that, I think, because sometimes, there's understood that some work better than others, but then it's about then giving them their own internal cues to understand. And it might be an external way to actually create a cue, but then it creates their own internal awareness of it. So we're trying to actually utilize as much as possible. But at the same time, even giving them examples that make sense to them. So you're right, I had a teaching background. And so understanding language patterns of each individual that turns up and listening to their story. Sometimes it's the first 15 minutes of a session that I'll just listen to what they've been getting, injuries they've had, what are they being coached on, what have they been taught previously. And through all it, and it might get deeper. For some people, it does get a little bit deeper, which is great because you get to understand the athlete better. But it also gives me information to be able to relate back to them. So when you're getting towards the end of the session and they're telling us, now you understand why, you see that race image and you're never in the air. Or, it takes one moment out of 22 different shots that you might see something that kind of looks good or feel good at any moment. Now you start to understand because they told me that story at the start of the session. So you kind of relate it back to them. So using everything you can to be able to get them to kind of connect and understand why and what they're trying to achieve or what they're trying to do after the session when they're out by themselves. And you talk about the music side of things or plugging in, and people think that that's their version of meditation. When meditation is about always bringing back to breath, always come back to breath. Running should be always come back to movement, not I get lost and think about everything that happened during the week or, what I'm doing for work tomorrow or just lost in some music or a podcast. That's not meditation. That's distraction. So bringing back to movement so that you can focus on that movement, so you can refine and habitualize that movement pattern, so then you can go to the next piece. And that's what meditating or the meditative state of running should be.
It's funny, when I was a junior in the 90s doing junior triathlon, how running coach back then, there weren't really triathlon coaches. I think Jenny Alcorn up here on the Gold Coast was probably the first recognised triathlon coach that I knew of. But, I had a swim coach. My running coach was a track and field guy. And so I got thrown in Grafton with the track and field athletes. We had some pretty decent ones in town. And I'm doing all these running drills. And I think he was so far ahead of his time because some of the best recollections I've had of running over 30 years were just these simple times when we were down at the track or at the beach with no shoes on, I can still feel what some of those runs felt like at 44. I'm about to turn 45, and that would have been when I was 15, 16. I can still feel some of those sessions and how free and liberating it felt to be no shoes, running these hill repeats on the sand. And it's really interesting listening to you speak about those internal sort of feelings. And then I think about the evolution over time to a GPS watch to. I mean, I know the shoes have moved on. I've had a history of kneecap pain, and I don't like the high stack shoes now. I really find them like put me in a zero drop, like a Nike Zoom Streak from the early 2000s any day of the week.
6 was great.
You know, I can. I feel better about it. Yeah. I feel like so alienated with that high stack shoe. Anyway, I don't think I'm making a point of such, but other than probably painting a picture that. Over distraction or sometimes getting away from that simplicity, that meditative state.
It's true. Like, if I can enlarge that bullseye. So if you're thinking back to like when you're 16 and on a specific couple of examples, what I'm trying to do is open up that sweet spot, enlarge that bullseye so that becomes the norm rather than a reflective shit, such and such years ago, I can remember a couple of these runs where I just was hitting a sweet spot where could have been, and sometimes I'll do this with my athlete, I'll run next to them to set a timing within a specific cue. I think I even might have done it with Ellie, like to run next to it, don't worry about the timing of the movement, you focus on the movement but do it in my timing. So you're kind of creating a bit of scaffolding to allow them to go, okay, I can take one piece of thought away, so I'm just going to match that timing with this new cue, and you do that with them, and then you take away me running next to them but match the timing, and then they go, oh shit. So that whole sweet spot is like, okay, I can do this the next run and the next run and the next run, and now all of a sudden they might have 6 weeks, 3 months of training load where they're doing this movement. They go, holy shit, now I can think of a 3-month period where it felt like that rather than, a couple of times. Yep. It is. And then for coaches, I'm not in the coaching space of day-to-day coaching. It's about kind of opening the sweet spot up for them, because once there's a bigger sweet spot, they can actually move some toggles around. It's not like, okay, we can only do 4 runs per week and it's limited to this amount of loading and this amount of intensity, because I know that once they hit somewhere around that area, they're going to have some breaking points, whether it's in the same spot or some similar spots. If we can actually open that up, it's like, oh, okay, now they can run 5 times, or we can add some intensity, or we can add some volume, because now the breaking point is actually increased, or that sweet spot is increased. And that's kind of like the other side to it as well, not just the feel.
You used the word rhythm before, and I like to keep things as simple as I can. And when people ask me what does good running technique look like, it comes up in the physio clinic often. I have nothing else to say other than good running is all about rhythm.
Yeah.
What would you add to that?
Yeah, so it's kind of complex. So rhythm...
I have other things to say, like if it's a specific injury rehab process, but in simple terms, if I think about what is a good technique, I'll revert to that rhythm word that you use.
And the rhythm can come in 2 ways, because it can be rhythmic as well. And you can see some people that have got some movement patterns. They go, every now and again at a certain pace, I feel like I'm in really good rhythm. And when you watch them run, it's almost like this figure of 8 movement that's happening one side or the other. And it's like, oh, no, that's rhythmic. That's almost like a little dance move you're doing. Good rhythm, it's symmetrical timing. It's in time. The rhythm that makes it look really smooth is literally flight. So time in air and a nice slow rhythm of movement. So when they are creating those two, then it just looks like really good rhythm. Simplicity of movement. The right things are moving where they should be and nothing else is. So then you can actually see that they are in good rhythm, which is timing and symmetry, rather than a rhythmic movement, which is like a series of movements happening that kind of looks like it's semi in time, but it's much more of a kind of a dance rhythmic movement rather than good rhythm. So it is kind of complex in that as well.
You've worked with lots of athletes, Paul, and you referenced your teaching background, your hockey background, which is obviously a highly skilled sport. What do you think of in working, as does Hugh and as does myself in our respective fields, we can all think of people we've worked with, and some just have this capacity to pick it up, and others, it could be a little bit of a harder road. Do you believe in this concept of like movement intelligence? Do you think some athletes are, there's a spectrum there of ability to take cues on board and action them, or I'm a big believer in that. I just think some people might not be recognised scholastically, but then I think, there's some of the cleverest people when it comes to how they use their body.
Yeah. And I think I haven't found to be any relevant ability that coincides with that. Like I've had elite athletes that connect immediately and be able to actually implement a cue, and I've got elite athletes that just either lose concentration of it, or it takes me a little bit longer to find their connect point. So that's a me problem. That's not even their problem when it comes to like the coaching side. It's like, how do I affect change? And some, a little bit more difficult. So you got to use the language a little bit better. You got to understand their kind of background and work out a way to get them. So that's like two ends of the spectrum of elite. I've also had novice athletes turn up, hardly ever run before. I can pick up something like that. And some at a similar level where it's like, okay, we've got to work through this a little bit more. Now they're probably a little bit more difficult because if they're, not elite in running, they probably haven't done a lot of other sport previously, so probably got to work a little bit harder. But if we can connect it to something that they have done a lot before or are successful at, then you can kind of create that connection point to come back to a movement. So I haven't worked out if there's any relevancy to like how good they are or how not, because I've seen both ends happen at both ends. Yeah.
It's funny you should mention that as well around, being able to connect, and if it doesn't happen quickly, it's more of an us problem. I always love the, taking ownership over every situation because it makes us get better. And it's very clear you're a great communicator. Like the way you're talking about storytelling, you're obviously very cognizant around how you're talking to people, what you're picking up from them, so you can relay a story back to them so they want to change and they know how to change. How can people get better at communicating? Is it, what would you put that down to as your skill set, mate?
I've spent many years in different countries trying to communicate to people that don't necessarily speak English, and I've had to go from a farm kid in Canberra that probably mumbles and doesn't pronounce his words all that well, to being in a position where I need to be understood. So you kind of got to work out how, because it's about not what they're doing, it's how can you be better understood. And I think that probably for me was the most important thing. Like I want to be able to relay my message. I want the person to understand that what I'm trying to convey. And I don't always get that correct still. Like it's kind of one of those things that I'm continually trying to get better at. As far as improving, it's probably understanding that your speaking style, like say your personal speaking style, isn't the way that you're going to be able to connect to everyone. And being able to adapt to theirs is going to be your best possible chance of being able to connect to that person, to relate to that person, and then to be able to, whether it is to impart knowledge or coaching or even understand it in return, and that's kind of the best way to learn about that, because it's everyone else is going to speak in their own manner with their own history and their own experiences, so better understanding that yours is going to work, so work out what theirs is.
It's fine. The listening element of that obviously is a profound element, that you need to understand where they're coming from. So being a great listener seems like that is a key part when you said, let them go for 15 minutes sometimes at the start of a session. And then that goes back to that last point around, giving someone the answer. Sometimes as coaches, and, hopefully I do this less now, but you show up and you want to like prove how much you know to people and you give them the answer. And I feel like unfortunately, a lot of doctors and people in positions of power just talk at people and never really give the person a chance to talk and be heard and understand where they're coming from. So what you're talking about now goes back to exactly, probably wanting to get it right and not be right. Like if you are coming from a place of trying to help somebody, that should be your number one goal anyway. Whereas I think a lot of clinicians are, clinician-led rather than client-led. And I just wanted to make the point that I feel like if someone's listening at home right now and should be like, I actually talk too much in a session, or I'm guilty of that. And I feel like it's a really profound way of helping people at a deeper level, which, we're all in the business of helping people. Like that's intrinsically what we do and what we love doing. So I think Brad does this really well. He's, when we first spoke on that first episode, you have people in vulnerable states and injury, so being able to hear their story and make them feel heard, and it's a superpower, I believe. So again, not a question, but just more a point around appreciating that, and I just wanted to highlight it so people take note and next week maybe in your session, spend less time talking to people and more time being a good listener and a good communicator.
Once you understand them better, you can treat them better, you can coach them better, you can relate to them. I think that the most important one is relate to them better, because then you get information out of them that could be really handy for the treatment or the coaching. Unfortunately, like the three of us are probably under time constraints at some times. So like I make a point of allowing additional time, and you can't always. So like within a timetable, sometimes you can't. And you can understand why people in some points it's like, no, we need to tell and to say what the problem is and to get through it, because if I don't, then my next client, patient, athlete is going to be behind, and the next one. So I understand that there are constraints sometimes, but I think the most important thing is to relate to the athlete so that they get the best out of it, and they'll probably appreciate that more than having the extra 10 minutes lifting something or getting rubbed or running up and back a couple of times, whether it be the three of us. So I think that they'll walk away. You think they're not giving them what you should be giving them because what they've turned up is for treatment or coaching. But I think being related to and heard is going to be so much more important in the future.
My favourite question, and I shared it with you, and it's nothing that others wouldn't do, but I think it changes the tone of every consultation that I take of a new patient, initial appointment, is in your heart of hearts, what's your greatest concern, Hugh? What's your greatest concern, Paul? What is your greatest worry about this? And that changes everything for me in a physio consult room. And I'm trying to, over the years, 19 years of it, coach other physios that we have had at the clinic and broader around. Actually, it's not about the pain. They never come because of the pain. What is your greatest concern? And that, once you've got that deep level, and I'm sure you have your own process, Paul, in working with your athletes, that's the sweet spot. That's what we need to zero in on. It's what matters to them, not what we assume matters. And I think I'd agree, Hugh. You stand out with your communication. Doesn't always happen by accident. I think can probably also happen because you reflect at times and realise, well, we missed the mark.
Yeah. Quite a few times. What are some of the most surprising responses when you ask the question?
Oh, Paul, I would probably have a 50% at least ratio of tears, and because you just allow space, and you almost know it's coming. So I almost get the tissues ready. And I just say it that verbatim in your heart of hearts. What's your greatest concern about this? And then it just all flows. One example, and I think I shared it when Hugh was a featured guest on the show, was the mother who was coming in for a running related injury, and she was trying to run the Gold Coast. It was either the half or the full. This is quite a few years ago, and I said I can't remember the lady's name, but I could have gone, or whatever the injury was, yep, let's get on with it. You want to run the half or the full? And I asked that next level question, which was, in that case, Tina, why is the half marathon or the marathon so important to you? It was that next level. And then she broke out and she's like, we lost our daughter last year to cancer. And this, I'd always said I'd run it for her. And it changes everything. She's not coming in because of a sore knee. And it's like, wow, if I didn't ask that question, just go one step deeper. So that's probably one that sticks with me, Paul, over the years. And there's been many others. And I'm sure what are some of the reasons that, stand out to you when you could assume they're just coming to improve their running? But what jumps out to you over the years?
I think just the amount of times, and particularly more recently, how much mental health plays a part in the reason for exercising, and that running is an opportunity for them to help with that. And I think that's the most consistent that keeps coming up, and in the last 3 or 4 years particularly.
There's a growing awareness around that too. People can articulate that clearly now,
exactly,
can't they?
Yeah. And I think there's probably, that was evident prior to, but without that ability to articulate it or even to feel comfortable to be able to articulate it, I think there's probably the capacity for both. So that's probably coming up more often than not.
I see that often written on the registration forms, mental health. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. And so we think it's just about the running, but sometimes the running might be their only saving grace. It's their lifeline.
Yeah.
It's their coping strategy, right?
Yeah, or if it's their time to themselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's, family or work or all the above, it's their time to themselves.
Yeah, complex system of systems, not just a running technique. Obviously, there's a lot attached to that.
Yeah.
Technically, I was going to ask Paul, you said something that caught my attention. If I recall it correctly, the humerus and the femurs move together. I think, did you say that?
Yeah.
Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
I think about like two different movement patterns, and the easiest to highlight is like walking and running. And I just think about like how the movements and the counter movements work together. And so if you're thinking about a walking pattern, it's the whole arm. So the end of that lever, and I always think about it in physics sense because it's not a theory, it's physics. So at the end of that lever is the hand, and as you're walking, it's matching and in time with the end of the leg, which is the foot. Okay, so as you're moving forward on the left arm, left hand and right foot, they work together. So when you then come into a running movement pattern, what happens is you want to use the most powerful portion of those two levers, okay, which is in the upper arm, the humerus, upper leg. So we'll halve that lever, okay, to make it easier to swing. You can swing it faster, it costs less, but you can also create a vertical movement. And what we're trying to do is actually match those two parts together. Now the classic overstriding is that the elbow or the upper arm or the arm swing, or depending on how they're moving, let's just say they've got a really good arm swing, is connected still to their foot. So as they're swinging forward on the left arm, their right foot is the furthest point or the connection point. Okay, what we want is humerus and femur to be working together, because then it's up and back and up and back, and then that's that rhythm of movement. So now we've got symmetry of left and right, and the two connecting points are working together, which then create power in the right force vector, which then looks really rhythmic. You've got good rhythm, good flight. You're landing closer to center of mass. We can't land under center of mass. I don't care what anyone says. You don't land under your center of mass. It's stupid. It's physically impossible. You want to land as close as possible to absorb and use the minimal amount of time and distance to absorb initial impact until your center of mass is on top of the foot, so then you can apply force again. Now you can't do that if you are connected to the foot, because that gets so far out in front of that center of mass. Yep. So when we come back to a running mechanic is humerus and femur that are working together. Yep. A walking mechanic is hand and foot, so the end of the arm, the end of the leg working together.
Yeah, I like it. I kid you not, I was walking with my 9-year-old daughter earlier today, several hours ago, and out of nowhere, she didn't know we were recording this for the topic, she said to me, "Daddy, why do my arms move like this when I walk?" I was like, "You're reading my mail, Olivia." And that's, I guess, it's...
And this is, do you know what, like I did this over, like I go over every July to the States and do kind of it's a Bauman Youth like summer running camp. And there's at one point, because a couple of the kids asked that same question, I said, okay, get your water bottle, because they get these fancy water bottles each time. Fill your water bottle up, hold it in one hand. Okay, so now all of a sudden the leverage of that water bottle is an extra, foot and a half long. And they walk, and okay, now, two ways. Make sure that your arms are moving the same amount as what you normally do, but that right hand has got an additional leverage and weight in it. Okay, and all of a sudden that has to work harder if it's going to move the same amount. Most of them though, then, okay, now just walk naturally. As soon as they start walking naturally, it's the end of the water bottle is synchronizing with the foot on the right hand, because now there's less movement that can occur because it's a longer lever, okay, but it's still in time. So it's just added length to the lever. The movement hasn't changed. So you can actually practice or play around with that, or you can get into this position where you just halve this one and you're going, okay, well now I've got to walk with, elbow to foot as I'm walking rather than hand to foot. It's actually just a synchronization of movements.
I mean, we're always taught at uni it's a central nervous system derived motor pattern. And then you open up that whole conversation around motor patterns and trainability. I used to, in trying to help injured runners, maybe address mechanics, use an analogy of a vinyl record and you're trying to jump over into a different groove. I mean, I don't know any in that, in trying to not sell the concept, but, have an athlete buy into what you're doing. Any barrier breakdown sort of phrases that you use, Paul, just speaking colloquially to athletes?
Normally it's just around like ground contact time, ground reaction force. It's like, if you could spend less time on the ground, or if you could absorb less impact per step, would you do it? Yeah. Okay. So let's go from there. Yep. They're just the simplest terms. And that is an outcome. Yep. But we can influence that. And so we go back to that same what you're talking. It just makes no sense when you say, okay, biomechanics doesn't matter. If we can reduce ground contact time and ground reaction force, which we can, quite simply, wouldn't you do it? just through a change of biomechanics? Well, yeah. So even just something as simple as that, because it's effectively what we're trying to do.
Yep. Keep it simple, scientist.
Yeah. Seriously.
Paul, being very practical to the athlete, the runner, of which there's obviously many endurance athletes that follow the show, what would be your 3 top tips to the runner out there that has an interest in improving the way they move? And this is a hard question because there's no context to the individual circumstance, but maybe Paul's top three run biomechanic cues or rules.
Okay, so I mean, one's not a cue, and we can maybe put this on the side if you don't count this, but self-awareness, create self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So firstly, when you are running, start to understand what each arm is doing. Are they doing the same thing? Mm-hmm. Like something as simple as just understanding what your body is doing when you run, to then start to, paint the picture or understand the patterns of movement that you're going through. Like even on the online series, I say, record yourself running so that you can at least look at it. Because a lot of times people look at it and go, A, they haven't looked at it before. So there's a good step in the learning process in itself. B, it's like, well, I haven't really looked at it. So then they look at it and go, why is my right hand or right arm doing that? Why is my left in my pocket? There's an understanding from visually then what they are doing, so that then they can go out and do the self-awareness portion. Understand what you do first before you can make changes. Because in some cases, you might not need to make a change to an area, okay? Because you might be doing, I fucking nailed that. That's awesome. So self-awareness is key to start with. The first protocol, I'd say, create symmetry of movement. Even if it's a really poor movement, at least make it equal left and right, like particularly the upper body, so that at least it's sending a message down the chain, left and right, that it is symmetrical. There's no way you're going to have balance, whether it be impact or timing or movement, down the chain if the top half isn't doing something symmetrical. So even if it's a poor movement, make it symmetrical. And then I think the third one, if we're going to think about bottom half, is start to think more about getting up, not pushing down. Okay, so our biggest inhibitor when we run is gravity. Never changes, no matter what the surface, no matter what the distance, no matter what the incline or decline. There is one constant, no matter what the weather, running by yourself or a group, the one constant is gravity. If that's going to pull us down, how about we just start to make movements that oppose it? Get off the ground. So they're probably my 3.
Awareness, symmetry, get off the ground.
Yeah. Fight what is opposing us every single time, which is gravity, and then we can go from there. If you start running on the spot, yeah, you've probably overdone it. I can tell you now, more people are down the other end of the spectrum, and they're thinking that they're running forward. I'm not like on this, the kind of the physics side of things, where you're saying 80% of your forces need to be vertical. I can tell you now, not many people are doing that. So start to get off the ground, start to oppose gravity. So that'll be my kind of third one.
And when you say get off the ground, I know we've had some back and forth on this in the past, but where do you see S&C work coming into impact mechanics and people's ability to get off the ground?
Well, I think the big thing for me is I think there's the majority of the strength and conditioning coaches are doing the right things and the right movements and the right strength exercises, but people go out and run and don't use what you're teaching them. So you might have people, and using the word pogo, going out and doing pogos and doing plyometrics and doing skipping and hopping and making sure that their calf Achilles tendon is loaded in a manner, or underload and returning load really well, and then they go out in a manner that's an overstride. You don't use that return of energy in that movement pattern. So I think a lot of times doing the right stuff, it's understanding then, why isn't this actually translating? It's not moving in a manner. It's like me coming into you and saying, I get a really sore elbow because I'm a baseball or a throwing sport. And, you go, okay, well, I'll rehab this. So, Brad, you can rehab this. And you'll be like, okay, we'll strengthen that, but we'll also strengthen, muscles that you need to throw. But you haven't gone out and looked at me when I go and throw, and I'm throwing like this, and I'm actually throwing just straight from the elbow. It's not until I actually do a better mechanic and utilize the muscles that you've treated and that you've strengthened and put it in a really good manner, that then I can actually utilize what you guys have set up. So yeah, that'd be my answer to it.
I had a bit of a giggle there, and maybe you've had times yourself, mate, when you're a young clinician, or hopefully, not many people out there listening are still doing this, but like a runner coming in, and it's the 5th person they've seen for an injury, and you're like, has anyone ever looked at you run?
Yeah.
Just crickets. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, that bugs me, because people come up, they go, I've been told I've got to do this, 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 and this with my technique. Like if they're getting technique advice, what cadence they should, or they should be landing at this part of the foot, or they should be doing this. Do they see you on a treadmill? Like, because normally it's in a practice, and I understand that there's limitations to it. So is it in a practice? Is it on a treadmill? No. They see you run? No. Just told me that's what I should be doing. All right. It happens way too often.
Yep. I know a physio colleague of mine that was sitting exams, and for the highest level of performance in the physio industry, and she had a running patient, and probably the deciding factor between her passing and not was that she didn't run the runner on the treadmill during the consultation. It's an incredibly difficult 1 hour, highest of high standards. Not to say she wouldn't have on day 2, but anyway, that's just a immediate recent example. Run the runner.
I think
unless they're injured, of course, and they can't run.
No, but of course. But I think this comes back to, and this comes back to, we don't put credence into the biomechanics and how important that they are. That is almost not acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable. But there is an acceptance that we don't need to look at them run, because there's still this narrative around, they don't matter. Come on. Like, I think that's what we're talking about, that disconnect.
I had a personal experience as well, recurrent calf strain. It was probably the 3rd or 4th physio that I saw that actually had a look at me run.
Yeah.
I was like, they're like, you're not strong enough. I'm like, man, I've done your 30 single leg calf raises. I've got the 1.5 times body weight strength. They're like,
you seen your calves?
Genetics, mate. They're all show no go.
And my quads.
But so it was so funny that was my personal experience, and I thought, I should have known better, but that was kind of like, you learn along the way. I was a young clinician, and it was a good experience for me to go through, so I didn't make the same mistake when people were on their 4th physio and hadn't been able to fix this recurrent strain. So make sure you're assessing people running.
Yeah.
Or if you don't know how to, refer to someone who does, like yourself.
I think a lot of practitioners in my space, the physio space, get overwhelmed with what they seem or deem to believe to be complex. And I remember Rich Willie at his Restoring Load Capacity to the Injured Runner course that he has delivered around the world, but he did a 2-dayer in Melbourne, which I attended a few years ago. And I remember listening years ago, 10 years prior to that, to Rich talk about his PhD in running biomechanics and running-related injuries. And I remember thinking, I need to up my game, because when I do stick a runner on the treadmill, I'm very qualitative versus quantitative. I'm not using fancy apps to, I'm more looking at what I know about their injury history and how they're moving and trying to match them together. I remember sort of at that time thinking less of my practice when I would listen to someone like Rich talk about all the quantitative data, angles and things. And it was quite a moment years later in Melbourne when I sat in his course. He almost stood there and gave an apology to the room for over quantitatively assessing runners in the past. And he said, it doesn't necessarily translate well to the runner in front of you. We need to take a qualitative approach, have a look at how they're moving, know their history, look for areas of high energy absorption and keep it simple. And I remember feeling really liberated, because I'm like, well, that's essentially what I've done intuitively for the last 9 years. Right. But I remember beating myself up. So I think there's a perception that it's more difficult than it needs to be. It's not taking away the skill that you've obviously got in your coaching. But
I don't use any of that either. It's all by eye and pattern recognition. So I think that is overkill, because you're like, again, going back to the individual silo that I think about, like you can go to, what is ideal angles? It's about the individual, and we're trying to improve what they're doing. What are they actually loading and how are they loading it? That's the important bit. Yeah. And understanding the movement patterns that they are going through and being able to see them, that's the important thing.
Paul, thank you for coming up from down south for today.
Hey, do you know, when I left, there's pissing down rain. I come here and it's nice and sunny, so...
This is a promised land. This is a promised land.
You should be thanking us.
Thanks for bringing me up. This has been fantastic.
Every guest of the show, though, Paul, gets asked a couple of set questions. It's been this way for 9 years of the program.
But just before you jump into that, Paul actually was in Nike in the US. He was meant to fly in this morning. He luckily had a few days leeway, so he wasn't flying in off the red eye overseas.
We had it organised. I was like, I can do it. I'll be coming straight from the States and coming up for it. So I won't be feeling nor looking my best, but I had a couple.
Here you
of
are, and you're looking fresh. I commented on how good you looked under lights.
Just got in this morning. Imagine if I had a couple of days rest. This would be great.
That's commitment. Yeah. But one of those set questions, Paul, is if you could boil everything you've learnt through your extensive athletic career as an elite level hockey player, professional life as a teacher, and also obviously with your balance runner business, into one piece of advice to help athletes perform at their physical best, what would that solitary piece of advice be from Paul MacKinnon?
I mean, it comes back to self-awareness, not of movement, but just understanding where they are right now. I think where they are right now will give them an understanding of where they can, take a next step, which is taking a next step, and understanding that it's each little piece that actually gets to that elite performance. But they can't get there if they're not fully aware of where they are in this moment and what they need to do to start to take those next steps.
Self-awareness.
Great one. The other tradition of the show that Brad has had going over the years is a challenge, a physical challenge for the listener to embody over the next week, month, to help them perform at their physical best, or just put them in an uncomfortable spot, or get them to run, have better biomechanics with their running.
Film yourself. So we did the self-awareness, and I think you can kind of tap onto it a little bit too much, but I think film yourself. And if you haven't, then this is going to be a really good key for you to understand what you're doing, particularly when it comes down to the biomechanics and what you're doing, and understand why you see those race photos. Start to get an understanding of what you are doing each footstep that you take, because every step costs, and you want to know what you are doing to create that cost. It can be eye-opening, it can be confronting. I mean, it can be difficult to absorb, but I think it's a really important process to go through so that you can start to create that awareness and that understanding of what you're doing.
Film yourself, and then correct me if I'm wrong, the arms, rib position, there's obviously, if they want to find out more, and I highly suggest people do so, because I've learned a lot from you over the years, mate. Short time frame. I know you've really helped Salty. She'll be on the bike now, maybe getting close to the run. But some great technical changes, really helps offload some long-term injury spots that she had, hamstring tendinopathy, a few other things. So you've been really impactful for her and a number of other people I work with as well. So now, where can people go to find out more about you and what you have to offer?
Website is tbrunner.com. So all the cues, or the process from the filming to the session to actually all the cues that I use are all laid out there that you can follow. At the Balanced Runner on Instagram, and that's where I'll probably sort of highlight some of the people that I work with, some of the stuff that I'm sort of thinking through, or some of the concepts that I'm sort of talking through about what's the best case, or what directions of force are we trying to create, what are we trying to do, trying to get rid of some of the fallacies or some of the focal points that have been done. So that's probably the best way to look at that. But back on Ellie, one of the ones that you talk about like kind of hamstring loading has been for her in particular, has been kind of one of the greatest wins, I think, for us all, is that capacity to understand that when she gets into intense sessions, she's no longer worried about the next day of having that sore hamstring. Because intensity, particularly with high hamstring tendinopathies, intensity are one of those fear points. And once you can take away that fear, to be able to understand, I can actually run a little bit quicker, not only because my movements might be better, but because I'm not worried about it, I'm not holding back. Things like that can change, and they can change really quickly. They're the things that I love about what I do, because the individual sees it, feels it, and expresses it in a manner like, holy shit, I don't feel my hamstring anymore. It's been a week, or whatever it may be. They're the huge wins. They're the things that I really love about what I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I love about what I do as well. So
I think that's a nice perspective, because I think sitting here with my practitioner hat on, a lot of practitioners would be like, well, that's the loading, Paul, that's their gym, But I think practitioners that have that rigid line of thinking could probably do well just for opening up their mind a little and going, well, it's maybe not just the loading.
It's not just, it's a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And I think it's too biopic to think it's just the loading.
Yeah, well, and because you said he had those problems and it was just loading and capacity. He's increased his strength and he still had the same problem.
Yeah.
And particularly with repeat movements like running, if you're going to load hamstring through trying to create force, like propulsive force, not just stabilization force, through the hamstring, it's the tendons that are going to cop it. And as soon as you try and create a higher velocity movement, a higher force movement, they're going to get really sore. So no matter how strong they are, and you're going to keep doing that over and over, you're just increasing the force you can either produce or the amount of time you can actually absorb it until it's happening again.
You just kick the can down the road.
It does. Yeah. It's like you're increasing your kind of level marker. The difficulty about running is if you increase that level marker, someone's going to find that, because you're like, not many people go to like 4 days a week running X distance at X pace, and they never go further and they never go faster. The nature of all of the performance athletes, or even all of us who just want to get a little bit better, is like, oh, I'll go a little bit faster, or I'll go a little bit further. We're continually trying to get to that point. So you can do that, but if you're still going to make the same movement, you're going to come up against that same point.
Paul MacKinnon, thank you for coming on the Physical Performance Show.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Brad. Thanks to you. Really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you coming up, mate. It was awesome.
No, it was cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.